Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Better Marketing Podcast. I'm now in partnership with Meta, and thanks to Meta for supporting this. Really important learning available through all the podcasts, so we're delighted to get your help. And I'm even more delighted to welcome, I think this might be the first doctor we've had on the podcast. Today, we've got the privilege of having Dr. Frederique Covington Corbett, who currently is the Chief Global Brand and Marketing Officer at Unicef in the private partnerships part of Unicef based in Geneva. But she's had a really storied career around the globe as well, working for Visa for many a long year, Chief Global Brand Strategy and Integrated Marketing Officer at Visa based in San Francisco. She worked in Asia for them as well, where she looked after Visa in Asia Pacific. And she, before that, had worked for Twitter and did a great job there of looking at purpose. And she'd also worked agency side along the way, Ogilvy and Mather as global strategist and Y&R in the United States. So incredible career, but also it's Dr. Frederique's academic background, which is astonishing, actually. She's got such a strong background, I've got to read it to you. Doctoral degree in global leadership and change from Pepperdine University in Los Angeles, a BA and MBA from the Sorbonne University in Paris, and she's also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School for the Women in Public Policy program. And she's written a book, but more of that later. So a very warm welcome to Dr. Frederique Covington Corbett. Welcome. Well, Freddie, what a great career and what a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I mean, I think the thing that's amazing to me is to see you applying everything you've learned for UNICEF and in the private part of partnerships for UNICEF. You've got a really important role there. But I guess I'd like to start by, how are you feeling about that and what has your career before that brought to the UNICEF task? Because these are tough times for anybody and particularly tough times for a wonderful organization like UNICEF.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it's great to think about this. You don't really reflect on your experience; you sort of just do it. I mean, I think for me, it's really about meaning, human meaning and brand meaning. At the core of my career, I've always had a belief in the power of brands to shape that human meaning, and I've looked for brands and organizations that go beyond the functional tasks of their work, and whether that's through technology, finance, or humanitarian, that they really bring those stories of human meaning forward. So I was thinking, when I worked at Microsoft, there was always a higher purpose of empowering people to fulfill their potential through technology. We were not just selling software or tablets. It was really more around that potential that technology can enable. It's the same at Twitter. I remember standing up in a town hall and I asked Jack, if you had to summarize in one word what we do, what's our brand about? And he said freedom. And it was just so empowering. He really thought that Twitter was created to be this town hall and this place of freedom where revolutions, ideas, creativity could really mean something. And it's the same at Visa. I was really focused on making that corporate purpose come to life. So it wasn't about so much, financial services from the transactional perspective, but how through a payment across the world, you're creating, inclusion and empowerment, and you're having this network effect. So I think that's the through line throughout all of my careers. And of course at UNICEF, all of that comes magnified because there's nothing that has more impact and meaning than, saving the lives of children or just enabling children to reach their full potential.
But in a way, I think what's interesting seeing you take a role like this is I'm wondering what UNICEF are now doing that they weren't doing before. So, what has your experience brought them? Because, as I said in the first question, these are important times because the backdrop of society at the moment is tough in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. It is tough right now. I think as we're seeing a lot of trend lines in terms of polarization, radical moves to the right, people being concerned about their economic prospects and migration, climate change. So I think, what I was brought into this role, it was new, so it didn't exist before. UNICEF has always been an innovator and a pioneer within the UN system, so it's no surprise they created this role. It's a different kind of marketing. It's not just marketing for raising awareness of the brand. It's really about mobilizing people and resources and action. And I really like that. So how are you really using marketing to position the organization in the span of all of the other UN agencies? And then in the context of where I sit in the private sector division is how are we really calling on private sector actors to be this force for good and this force for change. Companies are not just selling goods, they're actually part of the global economy, and they have accountability and responsibility in the business that they do in respecting the rights of children and almost, creating the pathway for what the future will look like and those future consumers and those future workers. So it's a different kind of marketing, not just awareness, but mobilizing and asking the private sector to have this sort of catalytic effect on the world through the work that we do through children. So it's very meaningful, and what matters the most is when we have partners that come to the table and say, what can I do? I may be in something, a business that I don't necessarily think touches children, maybe selling shampoo or what have you. Is there something I can do? And we usually find that through value chains and the ecosystem, there's always something that a private sector actor can do in terms of playing their role for creating a better future. So it's that kind of marketing for impact and long-term change.
And obviously, apart from the variety of roles you've had, you've done them in different geographies, and you're rare in that, because I think you're a proper global marketeer because you've lived and worked in other places. And how do you see the marketing culture being different? And again, as you do this role, I think you're Geneva based,
Yeah.
and you're bringing all the cultural learning together. But how do you see the differences in marketing? By the way, I must insert here, I'm doing everything I can to avoid talking about the current political backdrop, but I'm conscious that makes it even more difficult. But real focus here on the question around marketing culture.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we have a tendency to underestimate differences across regions. So, for instance, I'm French born, I speak French, and I'm in Geneva. Are they just because they speak that language, or are they like French people? Not at all. So, it is very important to be humble and extremely aware that across different regions, marketing cultures will also shift depending on consumer behaviors, regulation, local sensitivities. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see is marketers, being too self-centered and taking their own view of the world and projecting that onto their brands, so to speak. So you really have to have cultural sensitivity, cultural elasticity. And, I've come to believe that it's no longer think global, act local, but I think it's actually think local, act global, right? So how you're really thinking at a very local level, understanding all those differences, those local nuances, and from that local understanding, can you act globally as one force? So I think things have changed quite a bit. Just even about a decade ago, the Western world had such preeminence over other cultures. It sort of implied a paradigm of West knows best and everybody does it this one way. I think there's definitely no one way anymore, and marketers need to be aware of the political environment and how that also affects their consumer bases. And it's a multi-fractional world today. So understanding that and how that affects people's lived experiences and even how they might buy that cookie, simple things, it matters.
And I think from a brand perspective, as you think about UNICEF, I mean, how much does that change how UNICEF presents itself around the world? Because when I think of UNICEF, I have a very clear view of what the global brand is about, and obviously the actions are then different. But seen through your eyes, how are you seeing the UNICEF brand evolving?
Yeah, I think it's the same for big global brands, which is they need to stand for something very simple that has to be the same mandate wherever you are. I mean, in our case, we stand for children's rights. We're here to protect children and to be for children. We are for every child. That's our tagline. So, however that shows up anywhere in the world, whether that be the work we do in Afghanistan to the US, global North, global South markets, the mandate stays the same. And then the actions and the programs, we have 195 markets around the world. We're also structured in different ways through country offices and national committees who represent our brand around the world, and they have a lot of autonomy. So the brand will manifest itself through different programs, obviously through different languages, and they do their own activities. But what matters in the end is the mandate, and hopefully, like you said, that people know and feel, okay, children, that's not a cause that can divide. It is still hopefully one of those things in the world that can unite us. Who doesn't want to pave the way for the next generation and make sure that as many children can grow up happy, healthy, with equity and the opportunity for a great life.
That's fantastic. And I think you recently were talking about the expectations that Gen Alpha have of the world. The most connected generation ever,
Yeah.
who are looking for a different kind of leadership based on values, truth, growth, and transparency. And at the moment, if I kind of read that and ponder the heroes they might have and where they see that kind of leadership, I can think of some myself. But what about you? When you said that, did you have in mind what Gen Alpha who they were looking at, and who they were thinking about?
Well, I feel very embarrassed that we're doing a bad job for Gen Alpha. I think they're way smarter than us in many ways. They've grown up digital, in a world of constant connectivity. They're never offline or online like we are. That that's it. They're just connected. They do expect a different kind of leadership. It's no longer authoritarian. It's not position based. It's all about values and truth and transparency. I think in many ways they feel let down today. It's very hard to be a young person today and find true inspirational leaders. As I've mentioned before, we see the rise of the populist leadership movement that has created, I guess, a bit of a divide between what good leadership is in the literature and then actually how it's practiced. If you're a young person, you're like, this is what good leaders are supposed to be, but why are most leaders like that? It's quite difficult. See a lot of leaders today who divide and use fake news. They're not transparent. They're not inclusive. So it can be kind of confusing. I do think there are some great leaders. I think about Jacinda Ardern, who's led with a lot of empathy and openness, did a remarkable job during COVID, and was one of the reasons that New Zealand did so well, because she exemplified that kind of leadership. I think about Tim Cook from the technology sector, who's championed privacy and ethical responsibility in technology, which is also quite unique. But I do think it's hard for the younger generation, and these are the things that resonate with them. And I'm hoping that when they come of age to be leaders, we will finally, hopefully, see a reintegration of what should be and what is. That's my hope.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, without hope, we don't have much. So I was hopeful as you about that future. And I think I know when you were at Visa looking after their global brand strategy, you were responsible for looking too deeply at their purpose and what their role in society was and corporations. And we've been through probably the last 10 years where purpose has had a bad rap. And some of it, as Mark Ritson would say, is because of the forgive the world, the bollocks that some brand purpose has led to, but other purpose has been really, really impactful and effective. Can you speak a little bit about that experience and how you saw it grow the brand, and perhaps re-advocate for brand purpose because it's fashionable to knock it now, which I think is unfair.
It's actually no wonder one of the big trends that we're seeing emerging is the hushing trend. I was at the World Economic Forum and all the companies were talking about is hushing. So green hushing or purpose hushing, basically just don't talk about anything because otherwise it can immediately be misconstrued or taken out of context or polarized. So I think that's a greater commentary on the world that we live in, not so much on purpose, and why this trend of hushing. But when I was at Visa, one of the things that I got most excited about was how it's really about authenticity, right? So when your brand is not positioning, but it's actually doing, and it's not paying lip service to a cause or a purpose, but it's actually running its business and its ecosystem partners so that it does deliver on what it says. And, one of the most exciting things that we did was when we actually relaunched the brand with our employees. And that's when I realized they're the true custodians of the brand. And that's what purpose really means. When we were writing scripts to explain to people, what does it mean to come to work every day based on the purpose that we recrafted for the brand? How does it change why you come to work or what it is that you do? And people were so excited, and we were like scoring at 90% when we're doing our employment engagement surveys. So I think that's the test. Purpose has to be tied to what the company does, what the CEO does, why employees show up for work, and also the business scorecard. If they're not willing to put it on the scorecard and people are not performed, managed through that purpose, then again, it's just lip service. So I think now I've learned also to look for certain indicators that would help somebody understand whether that's just to look good or whether it's really embedded at the heart of, what the company does, what the CEO does, and how the business is really measured.
Wow, I love that, the clarity of what you must look for when you're looking for authenticity of purpose. I also think you can see in the youth at large around the world that they have choices about where they want to work, and one of the things they're really looking for is pretty much what you just described. They want to work somewhere where they can be proud to work, where they can make a difference, where the company makes a difference, but above all, where it's anchored into proper authenticity.
Yeah, and they'll look to that CEO or leader and they'll give it a 3-second overview. If there's no authenticity there, that's it, and then it doesn't. You can have pretty posters and say all you want, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big fan of building brands inside out, and of making sure that the values that you say you have are lived up and down the organization. And if they're not, that they're called out up and down the organization. And that
Yeah.
I think you can see that at work as well. So, yeah, we live in interesting times. And to segue into interesting times, you've written a book, which I'm going to have to look at the title because the bit that's very memorable is Leadership on a Blockchain.
Yeah.
But it's the next bit. What Asia can teach us about networked leadership. Um, can you tell us a bit about that? Because obviously it features the buzzword blockchain, but I know there's going to be a lot more to it than that. And if I were asking you to do the elevator pitch for your book, here's your chance.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I didn't come up with that title, so there's real authenticity also in the book title. I was actually conducting my PhD research a couple years back when I was in Asia, trying to understand how a lot of Asian teams and leaders have a different, more distributed approach to leadership, more teams based. And one of my respondents at the time said, it's like leadership on a blockchain. And I went, wait a minute, that's a really big idea. So once I was done with my dissertation and I decided to translate it into a book, I explored how blockchain principles, decentralization, transparency, distributed decision making, and things like that were really at the heart of what that particular respondent was trying to explain in transforming leadership. And so in this book, I basically share the accounts of a lot of the participants in my research and how they lead in that way. I think I really love doing this research, and I loved writing the book because it's more accessible. And it really provides some principles for how you can be a more modern leader, utilizing a lot of the startup kind of rules to distribute influence, to go faster, and to not want to, hold it all down to power influence, which is a very old view of leadership. I remember one of my participants saying, being a leader today is being a chief energy officer. That's the new CEO. You're not the know-it-all patriarch, but you're really the one unleashing that potential and that energy in everyone. And I absolutely love that.
Well, I love the chief energy officer. I would subscribe to that. So probably conscious of your time, my last question, I've got something at the end I want to talk about your board role that you do, but marketing's getting blamed for a lot of society's biggest problems at the moment, whether it's getting kids obese, overconsumption, stealing people's data, or promoting harmful things. But I'm going to guess I know what you'll say about this question, which is, do you think marketing can be a positive force for change in today's society?
Well, not only can it, but it should be. I mean, marketing is just like any powerful tool. It's neither inherently good or bad. It just comes down to how we use it. I was thinking about AI, is AI good or bad? AI is neither good or bad. It depends how we're going to be using it. What's good or bad is humans. So how are we directing our energy through these tools to shape them? I'm thinking about some of the most impactful marketing campaigns in history. They haven't been about doing bad things, but they've actually been about changing behaviors. I think about the anti-smoking movement, how marketing played a critical role in shifting public perceptions of cigarettes from these symbols of glamour to really understanding the deadly hazards. It's the same for campaigns that have tackled, obesity and healthier food choices. So yes, marketing is a force for good, but people need to want to place it into the right context. It's not just about selling, it's about inspiring and educating and empowering people to make better choices. So companies in the way they use marketing also have to ask themselves, what is their responsibility in showcasing that change and putting those investments to the right things, I think.
Fantastic. And finally, I know you're on the board of the Effies, so you'll have seen some of the absolute best practice there is to see. But what have you seen that might surprise the CMOs that'll be watching this?
Yeah, I think this could be a delight, which is what might surprise CMO is that the best work is really not the biggest budgets, right? And it's also not necessarily the most creative. So I think when people come into the Effies, they go, "Oh, if I don't have enough money, I'm not going to win an Effie," or if it's just not like creatively genius. But from a lot of the case studies that I saw, it was really more about having a very simple idea that is executed with a lot of emotional intelligence and through the line. So, for instance, I was thinking about this highly effective campaign called the Reflex Raincoat. Basically, this raincoat that was established by a Dutch e-bike, and it comes with this reflective surface, and it makes the cyclist highly visible at night. It's a super simple idea. It's highly utility oriented, and it won all of these prizes. And so I think that's the kind of work that really wins. It's not about, really flashy production or massive budget, but having a really sharp insight and also trying to solve a problem. That's where we go back to authenticity and purpose, right? You're not just trying to be loud. What are you doing that's really doing good? And in this case, the goodness of the product turns itself into fantastic storytelling, but because it's very simple and the product is doing the work and it's genuinely helping people. And so those are the things I think that I've learned. It's not it's not actually as tall order as you think. It's just really simple and super well executed and useful.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Well, Freddie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight and input. I think some fabulous learning there. I'm loving the Chief Energy Officer and also your exposition of brand purpose and how we should think about that today was just wonderful. So thanks so much for your time. Have a
Thank you,
great
David. It was a
rest of the
pleasure.
day.
Thanks for the great questions.
All right. Our pleasure. See you again soon, hopefully.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Wonderful conversation with Freddie there, and lots to remember, and very sound biteable it was too. And courtesy of Meta, who are supporting us, look forward to sharing some of those learnings very soon. And I'm very excited that we'll all see each other, hopefully, in the middle of March when we convene for the WFA Global Marketing Week in Brussels, home to the WFA, an institution which is even older than I am, and that's saying something. Anyway, see you very soon. Take care.